The night was cruel, darker than usual, and the wind cut across the barren land like knives made of ice. The alien girl moved slowly through the ruins of the old outpost, her steps weak, her body trembling with every gust that touched her skin. She wrapped her thin arms around herself, but the fabric she wore was torn, useless against the cold that seemed to creep into her very bones. Her breath came out in clouds, each one smaller than the last, as if even her lungs were tired of keeping her alive. She whispered under her breath, almost like a confession to the empty night, that she had never known a warm bed in her life. No soft place, no gentle shelter, only the hard ground, sharp stones, and a cold sky above her head. Her eyes were dim but alert, searching the shadows for danger. Every ruin around her carried memories of fire and screams. She had been cast out long ago, abandoned by her people because they called her bloodline dirty. She remembered their harsh words like echoes in her head. No home, no bed, no family. The thought haunted her as much as the cold did. Her legs gave way, and she stumbled against a broken wall, sliding down until she sat on the frozen ground. She pressed her knees to her chest and closed her eyes, wondering if this was the night she would finally give up. Her body shook violently, and her lips had turned pale blue. Far away, boots pressed against the gravel. A human soldier walked his patrol, his rifle slung across his shoulder. His breath misted in the same freezing air, but his steps were steady. He scanned the ruins carefully, every sense alert. He did not expect to find anyone here. Most avoided this dead place. Then, faintly, he caught a sound. It was not the wind or the creaking metal of abandoned buildings. It was softer, broken, like the whimper of a wounded creature. He turned his head sharply, holding still, listening again. There it was, a whisper. A weak voice swallowed by the storm. He moved forward cautiously, his boots crunching lightly against the ground, his hand gripping his weapon just in case. He found her near the wall, her figure small, fragile, and half covered in dust and dirt. For a moment, he thought she was already dead. Her eyes were closed, her breathing shallow, her body curled like a child. But then her lips moved, and he heard the faintest murmur. Never had, a warm bed. The words struck him strangely, not like a cry for help, but like the truth of a whole life. He lowered his weapon, staring at her with surprise. She was not a soldier, not an enemy, just a broken being left to freeze. She sensed movement and forced her eyes open. The blurred shape of the human stood before her, tall, shadowy, like a ghost. Fear shot through her chest, and she tried to crawl back, her weak arms shaking. Her people had told her about humans. Some called them monsters. Some called them fools. She did not know what to believe, only that no one in her life had ever given her safety. She pressed her back harder against the cold stone wall, her heart racing as if it would burst. The soldier saw the fear in her eyes, and he slowly lifted his hands away from his weapon, showing he meant no harm. His voice was calm, low, but clear in the sharp night air. "You'll die if you stay here," he said. She shook her head, her voice barely more than a whisper. I am already dying." Her words trembled as much as her body. She could not trust him, yet she could not stop herself from looking into his eyes. There was no mockery there, no cruelty, only a kind of concern that confused her. Why would a human care if she lived or not? He knelt down, close enough to see how frost had gathered on her hair, close enough to hear how shallow her breaths had become. He knew she had little time. He could walk away, leave her like this. That would be the easier choice. But his conscience tightened inside him, refusing to let him abandon her. He reached forward, his hands steady though she flinched. She tried to push him away weakly, but her strength was gone. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing, her body trembling in his arms like a fragile flame ready to go out. She pressed her face against his chest, too tired to fight, too cold to think. She smelled the faint trace of oil and smoke on his uniform, but also warmth. Real warmth that spread from his body into hers. For the first time, she felt something she had never believed existed. The heat of another life willing to share its strength with her. The human adjusted his hold on her and began walking back through the ruins. The storm grew worse, the wind pushing against him, but he did not stop. She opened her eyes slightly, watching his determined steps. Each one echoed louder than the storm in her ears, as if the world itself was shifting for her. A voice in her head whispered that this was a trap, that he would use her, that no kindness ever came free. But another voice, quiet and unfamiliar, whispered something else. Maybe this was the night her life would change. Maybe this was the moment her story turned from cold to warmth. Her eyes closed again, not from fear this time, but from exhaustion. Her head rested against his shoulder, and she felt her body relax despite herself. She had always fought to survive, but now, for the first time, she let go. If this was the end, at least it was not on the frozen ground alone. The human soldier kept moving forward, silent except for the sound of his boots against the earth. His arms were strong, his grip firm but gentle, as if he carried something precious. And in that frozen wasteland, under a storm that cared for no one, an alien girl who never knew comfort whispered her last thought before sleep. Warm bed. Would the human truly give her that? Or would the night steal her away before she found out? The storm did not answer. It only howled louder, swallowing everything in its path, except the steady steps of the man who refused to let her die cold. The door of the small cabin creaked as the human pushed it open with his shoulder, still holding the alien girl tightly against him. The warmth inside was faint, just a small fire glowing in a metal stove at the corner of the room. But compared to the freezing storm outside, it felt like another world. He stepped in carefully, making sure not to let the wind steal away the little heat he had managed to keep. The girl stirred in his arms, her eyelids fluttering, her breath weak. He set her down gently on the rough wooden bed, its blanket folded neatly on top. It was not much, just a soldier's cot with thin sheets, but to her it looked strange, almost unreal. She blinked at it, as though she was staring at something forbidden. He pulled the blanket over her, tucking it around her shivering body. The moment the fabric touched her, she stiffened and tried to push it away. Her eyes opened wide with panic, and she struggled, her weak hands pressing against his chest. Why? Why are you doing this? She whispered, her voice broken, afraid. She had never been offered warmth before, not even once. Every gesture of kindness felt like a trap to her. He did not answer at first, just crouched beside her and checked her face. Her skin was cold, pale, almost lifeless. He frowned, then spoke softly. Because if I don't, you won't survive the night. Her breath caught, and she turned her face away from him. Her thoughts raced. Why would a human, of all people, care if she lived? Her people had thrown her away like waste. Even her own blood had abandoned her. No one ever gave her a bed. No one ever gave her warmth, only harsh words and colder nights. She felt tears burning in her eyes, but forced them back, too proud to let him see her cry. She whispered again, "You don't even know me. You don't know what I am." The soldier looked at her with steady eyes, his voice calm. "I don't need to know. I can see you're freezing. That's enough." His words confused her more than they comforted her. She wrapped the blanket tighter around herself, not because she trusted him, but because her body ached for the heat. She watched him as he walked to the stove, adding more wood to the fire. The flames flickered brighter, casting warm orange light across the small cabin. His shadow stretched along the walls, tall and steady. She had always been alone in the dark. Now she found herself sharing a room with a man whose presence felt heavier than the storm outside. He returned to her side and placed a metal cup filled with warm water on the table. "Drink this," he said simply. She stared at it, suspicious, wondering if he meant to poison her. He noticed her hesitation and lifted the cup himself, taking a sip before offering it again. "See? It's just water." She blinked at him, unsure if such simple honesty was real. Slowly, with trembling fingers, she took the cup and sipped. The heat ran down her throat, making her chest ache as if her body was too fragile to accept such comfort. She closed her eyes for a moment, holding the cup as if it was a treasure. Her voice was almost silent when she said, "I never thought humans gave water without asking something in return." He leaned back slightly, shaking his head. "Not all of us are the same." Her heart raced. She had been taught her whole life to fear humans, to despise them. But the one standing before her did not fit those stories. He had lifted her from the ground when she was ready to die, brought her into his shelter, and now he was giving her warmth without demanding anything. Her mind warned her it was a trick, yet her body refused to let go of the blanket and the cup. For the first time in her life, she felt a thin thread of safety pulling her back from the edge. The storm outside howled louder, battering the cabin walls. She flinched at the sound, her eyes darting to the door. "They'll find me," she whispered. "My people, they'll take me back." Her voice was thick with fear. He shook his head firmly. "No one's taking you tonight, not while you're under my roof." His words were simple, but they struck deep inside her. No one had ever claimed her safety before, not even in words. She studied his face, trying to find any sign of a lie, but she only saw tired eyes that carried the weight of battles she couldn't imagine. Her body gave up fighting, and she sank deeper into the bed. The warmth from the blanket, the fire, and the cup in her hand started to spread through her veins like slow-moving light. She realized how tired she was, how long she had been forcing herself to stay alive with nothing but fear and stubbornness. For the first time, her eyes grew heavy not from weakness, but from the temptation of rest. But still, doubt clung to her. She asked in a trembling voice, "What will you do with me? Why let me stay here?" The human leaned against the wall, folding his arms across his chest. His voice was steady, with no hesitation. "I'm not going to do anything to you. You're safe because you need to be safe. That's all." Her heart twisted at those words. She wanted to believe him, but her scars whispered warnings. She turned her face to the wall, clutching the blanket so tightly her fingers hurt. Yet inside her, something small and fragile shifted. A thought she never dared to hold before crept into her mind. Maybe this human was different. Maybe warmth did not always come with chains. The storm outside raged on, but inside the little cabin, a new silence formed. She closed her eyes, her breath slow, uncertain, but calmer than before. The human watched her carefully, making sure she did not slip away into the cold again. He stayed awake, listening to the wind, his hand resting near his weapon in case danger came. She drifted in and out of sleep, her dreams filled with confusion. In them, she saw a bed that did not vanish, a warmth that did not burn, a hand that did not strike. She whispered again in her sleep, the same words as before, softer this time. "Never had a warm bed." And though she did not hear it, the human answered quietly, "Now you do." The storm outside grew even stronger, beating against the wooden walls of the small cabin like a monster trying to break in. The wind howled through every crack, and snow piled against the door. Inside, the fire in the stove flickered, filling the room with a soft glow that pushed back the darkness. The alien girl lay under the blanket, her body warmer now, but her mind restless. Her eyes opened slowly, and she saw the human sitting on a chair near the fire, his rifle leaning against the wall close to his hand. He was quiet, watching the flames, but she could tell he wasn't asleep. His shoulders were stiff, and his eyes were alert, like he was listening to every sound outside. She shifted slightly in the bed, the blanket slipping from her shoulder. The small movement made him glance at her. Their eyes met for a moment, and she quickly looked away, clutching the blanket tighter. Silence hung between them, heavy and strange. She could feel her heart pounding, but not from the cold anymore. Finally, her voice broke the silence. It was low, hesitant, almost like she was afraid of her own words. "You shouldn't have brought me here." The human tilted his head, his expression calm but curious. "Why not?" She pressed her lips together, then whispered, "Because my people will come for me. Because I don't belong anywhere. I was abandoned. I am nothing." Her voice cracked at the last word, and she swallowed hard, ashamed of showing weakness. She turned her face to the wall, hiding her eyes. The human did not answer right away. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, staring at the fire. After a long pause, he said quietly, "Nobody is nothing." His words were simple, but they struck her deeply. She clenched the blanket in her fists, her chest tight. She wanted to believe him, but her whole life had been proof of the opposite. She whispered back, her voice trembling, "My people called me dirty heritage. They said I was a mistake, born from two bloodlines that should never mix. They left me outside the city walls when I was only a child. Since then, I have never had a home, never had a bed of my own, only cold nights, hard ground, and hunger." Her breath shook, and her throat closed as she forced the last words out. "I don't even remember what it feels like to be wanted." The human listened in silence. His face didn't change, but his eyes grew softer. He could see the pain in her words, the way her body curled into itself like someone waiting to be struck. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, but he knew words alone would not erase years of scars. Still, he spoke gently. "They were wrong to do that to you. Whatever your blood is, it doesn't change the fact you're alive and you matter. She turned her head slightly, just enough to glance at him, searching his face for any sign of a lie. She found none, only steady eyes and a voice that carried no judgment. The fire crackled softly, and for a moment the storm outside faded into the background. She felt warmth creeping not just through her body, but through a part of her that had always been frozen. Her chest hurt, not from fear, but from something unfamiliar. Hope. Still, fear fought inside her. She whispered quickly, as if to protect herself from disappointment. Even if you say that, I know one day you'll send me away too. Everyone does. The human shook his head slowly. Not tonight. Tonight, you're safe. That's all you need to think about. She stared at him, her eyes wide and uncertain. She wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but the tiredness in her bones was stronger than her doubts. She pulled the blanket tighter, her body sinking deeper into the bed. Her eyelids grew heavy, but her mind refused to rest. She watched the firelight dance across his face, highlighting the lines of a man who had seen too many battles. She wondered why he would waste his time on her. She wondered if he was lonely, just like her. A sudden noise broke her thoughts. A sharp creak at the door. She gasped and sat up, her eyes wide with terror. "They're here," she whispered, her voice shaking. Her hands clutched the blanket as if it could protect her. The human was already moving. He stood quickly, his hand grabbing the rifle from the wall. His eyes narrowed, and he stepped toward the door. The sound came again, slow, dragging, like something scraping against the wood. The girl trembled, her breath quick and shallow. She whispered again, almost begging, "Don't let them take me." The human looked back at her, his voice steady, calm but firm. "I said you're safe here." His words cut through the fear like a blade. He stood between her and the door, his body tall and unshaken. The room filled with silence again, broken only by the storm outside. After a moment, the noise faded, leaving only the howl of the wind. The girl's body relaxed slightly, though her heart still raced. She stared at the man in front of her, realizing something she had never seen before in her life. Someone was standing in her defense. Not for gain, not for duty, but simply because he chose to. When he returned to the chair, his rifle resting on his lap, she whispered softly, almost to herself, "Why do you protect me?" He glanced at her, his face unreadable for a moment. Then he answered simply, "Because you deserve to live." She lay back down, her chest tight with emotions she couldn't name. She pulled the blanket up to her chin, her eyes wet, but refusing to let tears fall. For the first time, she felt the storm outside could rage forever, and it would not matter. Not as long as he sat there, keeping watch. She closed her eyes, whispering into the darkness, warm bed, and let herself drift toward sleep, carried by a fragile sense of safety she had never known before. The night dragged on, and the storm outside showed no sign of stopping. Snow slapped against the walls of the cabin, and the wind screamed through the cracks like angry voices. Inside, the fire in the stove hissed and popped, fighting to keep the room warm. The alien girl lay under the blanket, her eyes closed, but she could not fully sleep. Fear lived in her chest like a shadow. She kept listening to the sounds outside, afraid that any moment her people would come to drag her away. Each whistle of the wind sounded like footsteps, each creak of the wood like a hand reaching for her. She pulled the blanket tighter, her breaths shallow. The human soldier sat near the door, his rifle across his knees. He had not slept either. His eyes moved from the fire to the door, always alert, as though he had spent his life waiting for enemies in the dark. He noticed her restless movements and spoke softly, his voice carrying calm strength. "Sleep if you can. I'll keep watch." She opened her eyes slowly, looking at him through the dim glow. There was something in his tone that made her heart pause. It wasn't an order, not a command, but a promise. She nodded slightly and closed her eyes again, but she still could not let herself fall into peace. Hours passed. The fire dimmed and the room grew darker. Then, suddenly, a sound broke through the storm, a dull thud against the wooden door. The girl's eyes snapped open. Her breath caught in her throat and panic spread across her face. She sat up quickly, clutching the blanket as if it could shield her. "They've come," she whispered, her voice shaking. The soldier was already on his feet, his rifle raised toward the door. His face hardened, his eyes sharp. "Stay down," he said firmly. Another sound followed, this time a scrape, as if claws or boots dragged across the doorframe. The girl trembled violently, her whole body stiff with terror. She whispered, almost crying, "It's them. They found me." She pressed herself back against the wall, her heart beating so fast she thought it might break. She had seen this moment in her nightmares many times. Shadows at the door, rough hands pulling her away, voices spitting curses at her for daring to live. She buried her face in the blanket, whispering over and over, "Please, not again, not again." The human soldier glanced back at her, his voice steady but stronger this time. "No one is taking you." His words were heavy, sharp, like a shield set firmly in the ground. She raised her eyes to him, and for a brief second, her fear lessened. He moved closer to the door, placing one hand on the handle, his rifle aimed and ready. The scraping stopped. Only the storm could be heard, but he did not relax. He stood tall, unmoving, a wall between her and the unknown outside. In that moment, she saw him not as just a soldier, but as a barrier, her only protection in a world that had never wanted her. A sudden knock thundered against the door, loud and harsh. She cried out, pulling the blanket over her head, her body shaking uncontrollably. The soldier did not flinch. He shouted toward the door, his voice powerful, cutting through the storm. "This place is occupied. Leave now." For a moment there was silence. Then came a reply, not words, but a growl, deep and unnatural. It was not her people. It was something else. Her blood ran cold. She peeked out from under the blanket, her wide eyes locked on the door. "What is it?" She whispered, terrified. The soldier kept his aim steady. "Doesn't matter. Whatever it is, it's not getting in." The growl came again, closer, shaking the wood of the cabin. Something heavy pressed against the door, making it creak and bend. She gasped, covering her mouth to keep from screaming. The soldier stepped forward, bracing the door with his shoulder while keeping his rifle ready. The wood rattled, snow shaking loose from the frame. His muscles tensed, but his voice was still calm. "Stay behind me." She pressed herself tighter against the wall, her eyes locked on his back. He was one man, one human, against whatever waited outside, and yet he stood as if nothing could move him. The pounding on the door grew louder, angrier. Dust fell from the ceiling with every strike. The girl's body froze, her nails digging into the blanket. She felt trapped, helpless, like the frightened child she once was. But then she noticed something. He did not move back, not even an inch. He held the line, his figure tall and unyielding in the firelight. For the first time, she realized someone was truly ready to fight for her. Not to trade her, not to punish her, but to protect her. That truth made her chest tighten, her fear twisting into something else she couldn't name. Finally, after what felt like forever, the pounding stopped. The storm roared again, filling the silence left behind. The soldier waited, his breath steady, his rifle still raised. Minutes passed, but nothing returned. Slowly, carefully, he stepped back from the door. He did not lower his weapon, but his voice softened. "It's gone, for now." The girl let out a shaky breath she had been holding. Her body collapsed back onto the bed, weak from fear and relief. She buried her face in the blanket, tears slipping out despite her effort to hold them back. He turned toward her, his expression unreadable, but his eyes carried something strong. He walked back to the chair and sat down, the rifle resting across his knees again. "Go back to sleep," he said simply. She looked at him through wet eyes, her lips trembling. Her voice was soft, broken, but filled with wonder. "You stood between me and death. Why?" He met her gaze, and for a long moment he didn't answer. Then, finally, he said, "Because no one else ever did." His words pierced her like light breaking through a wall of darkness. She lay back slowly, her heart pounding in a different rhythm now. Not only fear, but something close to trust. The storm continued outside, but inside the cabin, she no longer felt completely alone. The night stretched on, heavy and endless, until the storm outside finally began to fade. The snow still fell, but the howling wind grew quieter, leaving behind an eerie silence that wrapped around the small cabin. The alien girl lay under the blanket, her body stiff from fear, her mind racing with memories of abandonment and loss. The earlier pounding at the door still echoed in her chest. She could not stop trembling, even though the human soldier still sat near the door, his rifle steady in his hands. She wanted to close her eyes and believe she was safe, but her heart refused to trust so easily. Then, without warning, the silence broke. A sharp crack echoed outside, like footsteps crunching through the frozen snow. The soldier stiffened instantly, his eyes narrowing, his finger tightening near the trigger. He rose from the chair slowly, listening. Another step followed. And another. He glanced at the girl, his expression unreadable but firm. "Stay down," he whispered. Her stomach dropped, and she clutched the blanket to her chest, fear choking her. She knew this sound. It was not the storm, not the wind. It was someone moving closer. The door shuddered violently as a heavy force slammed against it. The girl gasped, her whole body shaking. This time, it was not just claws or strange growls. Voices followed, harsh, cruel voices speaking a language she knew too well. Her people. She buried her face in the blanket, her body curling into itself. "They found me," she whispered, tears stinging her eyes. Her breath came in short, panicked bursts. The soldier's jaw tightened, and he pressed his shoulder against the door as it rattled from another blow. He raised his rifle, ready to fire if the wood gave way. The voices outside laughed, mocking, angry. "Give her to us, human," one of them shouted through the door. "She doesn't belong with you. She is ours to take." Another voice added, cruel and sharp, "Step aside, and maybe we'll let you live." The girl squeezed her eyes shut, her nails digging into her palms. She had heard these voices before, the same ones that had called her worthless, the same ones that had left her in the cold to die. Now they were here again, ready to drag her back into chains or worse. She shook her head violently, whispering, "No, no, no." The soldier looked back at her once, his eyes meeting hers. She expected him to hesitate, to think about handing her over to save himself. That was what people did. That was what she had seen her whole life, everyone choosing survival over her. But his expression was different. His eyes burned with something hard, unshakable. He shouted back through the door, his voice thunderous. "She's not yours anymore. She stays here." The cabin fell into silence for a brief moment, as though even the storm itself had paused at those words. The girl's eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat. No one had ever spoken like that for her. No one had ever claimed she was not theirs to harm. The silence broke with a furious roar. The door rattled again, harder this time, cracks forming in the wood. The soldier braced himself, his body strong, his rifle ready. The girl whimpered, burying her face in the blanket. She was certain he could not fight them all. She was certain he would fall, and then they would drag her away screaming. But he did not move back, not even an inch. He planted his feet firmly and shouted, "If you want her, you'll have to go through me." His voice shook the cabin walls, louder than the storm, louder than the voices outside. The girl's heart slammed in her chest, not with fear this time, but with something strange and powerful, hope. The door finally gave way with a crash, splintering open as figures forced their way inside. Dark shapes filled the doorway, their eyes glowing with anger and greed. The soldier raised his rifle and fired. The blast shook the room, the sound deafening in the small space. One of the attackers fell instantly, but the others pushed forward, weapons drawn. The girl screamed, pressing herself back against the wall, her body frozen with terror. The soldier moved like a wall of iron, firing again, then swinging the rifle like a club when one of them came too close. He fought with a strength that seemed impossible, his every move filled with the will to protect. The attackers shouted and cursed, trying to push past him to reach the girl. She could only watch, her eyes wide, her breath caught in her throat. For the first time, she saw what it meant for someone to fight for her. Every drop of sweat on his face, every swing of his weapon, every step he refused to give up was for her. She clutched the blanket tightly, tears running down her cheeks. But they were not only from fear. They were from the shock of seeing someone who would rather bleed than let her be taken. One of the attackers lunged with a blade, and the soldier grunted as it cut across his arm. Blood spread quickly, but he did not fall. He shoved the attacker back with raw strength and fired again. Another fell. The last of them hesitated, growling with rage, but when the soldier stepped forward, eyes burning, rifle steady, they faltered. For the first time, they saw not just a human soldier, but a man willing to die before giving up what he had chosen to protect. They cursed, retreating into the storm, their footsteps fading into the night. Silence filled the cabin once more, broken only by the soldier's heavy breathing. Blood dripped from his arm, his body tense from the fight. The girl stared at him, her chest heaving, her eyes filled with disbelief. Slowly, he lowered his weapon, turning toward her. His voice was rough but steady. "It's over. You're safe." She shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You're bleeding? You could have died." He gave a small, tired smile, wiping the blood from his arm with his sleeve. "Better me than you." Her heart ached in a way she had never known before. She pushed the blanket aside and stumbled forward, falling to her knees beside him. Her trembling hands reached for his wound, trying to stop the bleeding. Her voice broke as she whispered, "No one has ever fought for me. Not once. Why? Why would you?" He looked at her, his eyes steady, his voice quiet. "Because you deserve someone to." She pressed her forehead against his chest, her tears soaking his shirt. For the first time in her life, she felt warmth that was not stolen, not forced, but given freely. And she knew that night would stay in her heart forever. The cabin was quiet after the fight, but the silence was not calm. The fire still burned low in the stove, giving off a faint orange light that flickered across the walls. The human sat on the edge of the small bed, his sleeve torn and blood running down his arm. His breath was heavy, but his face was steady, his eyes sharp even in pain. He was alive, but clearly hurt. The alien girl knelt beside him, her hands trembling as she tried to press the blanket against his wound to stop the bleeding. She had never cared for anyone like this before, never been this close to someone who had risked everything for her. Her heart raced, fear and something new twisting together inside her. He tried to wave her hands away, his voice low but firm. "Don't worry about me. I've had worse." But she shook her head violently, tears filling her eyes. "No, if you bleed too much, you'll die. You can't die. Not after what you did for me." Her voice cracked, and her hands pressed harder, though her strength was weak. The human winced slightly, but didn't push her away again. He let her continue, his eyes softening as he looked at her face, pale from fear yet glowing with determination. She whispered brokenly, "All my life, no one stayed, no one fought for me. I thought I was cursed, made to be alone forever. But you stood for me. You bled for me. Why?" Her voice shook as she asked, as if she was afraid the answer would destroy the fragile hope growing inside her. He looked at her for a long moment before answering. His voice was quiet, tired but honest. "Because you deserve a chance. Because you're worth more than what they told you." She froze, her eyes wide, her lips parting as if she could not breathe. No one had ever said such words to her, not once in her entire life. She lowered her head, her forehead resting lightly against his chest as tears finally spilled from her eyes. She whispered, "I don't know how to believe that, but I want to." Her shoulders shook, and her tears soaked into his shirt. He lifted his good hand and placed it gently on the back of her head, his touch steady, not forceful. "Then believe it. Starting tonight." His words carried no demand, only a calm certainty that warmed her more than the fire could. After some time, her breathing steadied. She pulled back slightly, her eyes red, her face wet with tears. She looked at him again and noticed how pale he was becoming. Fear rushed through her. She stood quickly, grabbing what little supplies she found on his shelf, an old cloth, some water, and a small metal box of bandages. She had never treated wounds before, but she had watched others do it. Her hands shook as she worked, cleaning the blood from his arm and wrapping it tightly. Each time he hissed in pain, she flinched, whispering, I'm sorry. But he only shook his head and muttered, "You're doing fine." When she finally tied the bandage, she sat back down beside him, exhausted, her hands still trembling. The silence stretched between them again, but this time it was not empty. It was heavy with things unspoken. She looked at him, the man who had given her something she had never dreamed of, protection, kindness, warmth. The words slipped from her lips before she could stop them. "I never had a warm bed, not until now." Her voice was soft, fragile, yet filled with truth. He turned his head toward her, his eyes meeting hers. And for a moment, the firelight reflected in both of their gazes like a secret they shared. He shifted slightly, wincing at the pain in his arm, and lay back on the bed. His body was too tired to stay upright. She gasped softly, worried, but he lifted his good hand, motioning for her to stay calm. "I'll be fine, just need rest." She hesitated, then slowly sat beside him, her body tense. She pulled the blanket over him carefully, making sure he was covered, but when she leaned back, he whispered, his voice barely more than breath, "Stay." The single word froze her. Her heart pounded, and she stared at him, unsure what he meant. His eyes closed, his breathing slow, but he added softly, "You're safe here, and so am I, if you stay." Her chest tightened, and her hands shook. She had never been asked to stay. She had always been thrown away, pushed aside, abandoned. The thought that someone wanted her near was almost too much to bear. Slowly, carefully, she lay down beside him on the bed. The space was small, the blanket barely enough for two, but she tucked herself close, unsure if it was right but unable to pull away. She felt the heat of his body beside her, strong and steady, and for the first time in her life, the cold inside her began to melt. The storm outside growled faintly, but its power seemed weaker now, as if it had lost the fight. She turned her head slightly, her face close to his shoulder, listening to his slow breathing. Every rise and fall of his chest told her he was alive, and that alone gave her peace. She closed her eyes, whispering almost silently, "Thank you for giving me this bed, this night, this warmth." Her voice cracked, but she smiled faintly through her tears. She felt his fingers brush lightly against her hand under the blanket. Not gripping, not pulling, just resting there, simple and honest. That small touch burned deeper than any fire. Sleep crept into her slowly, but it was different this time. It was not the sleep of weakness or the surrender of someone ready to die. It was the sleep of safety, of a heart finally allowed to rest. She let her eyes close, her body sinking into the warmth beside her. For the first time in her life, she did not dream of running, of chains, of cold nights and cruel voices. Instead, she dreamed of the steady sound of his heartbeat, the glow of the fire, and a whisper that repeated in her mind, "You are safe." She never knew how much a bed could mean until that night, when it was shared not with fear, but with trust. The human lay still, his eyes closed, but a faint smile touched his lips as he felt her beside him. His wound ached, his body heavy, but he knew it was worth it. He had promised she would not sleep cold again, and now, in the quiet of the cabin, he had kept that promise. Outside, the snow continued to fall, but inside the bed was warm, and two broken souls began to heal side by side. The first light of morning crept slowly through the cracks in the cabin wall, soft and pale, touching the floor with a faint glow. The storm had ended during the night. The world outside was silent, covered in a thick blanket of snow, as if all the chaos and fear had been buried under white. Inside, the fire in the stove had burned down to glowing embers, giving off only a little warmth. But the bed, for once, was not cold. The alien girl opened her eyes slowly, her body stiff but comfortable in a way she had never known. She blinked, adjusting to the dim light, and then realized where she was. Lying close to the human soldier, the blanket wrapped around them both. For a moment, she froze, afraid it had all been a dream. But the steady sound of his breathing reached her ears, and she knew it was real. Her heart tightened. She had spent her life believing she was unwanted, cursed, nothing more than a mistake. Yet, here she was, safe in a bed that was not hers, but had been shared with her. Warmth wrapped around her from his body, steady and real, chasing away the endless cold that had haunted her nights. She stared at his face in the pale light, at the tired lines around his eyes, at the way his hair fell messily over his forehead. He looked worn, but calm, as if carrying her weight had been worth every drop of blood he lost. Her throat ached as she whispered softly, almost to herself, "I never thought I'd live to see this morning." He stirred at the sound of her voice, his eyes opening slowly. His gaze found her, and a faint smile touched his lips despite the pain still etched in his body. "You're awake," he said softly. His voice was rough, but steady, carrying the same calm strength she had begun to trust. She nodded, her eyes lowering, unsure how to face him after the night they had shared. But he reached out weakly, his hand brushing against hers under the blanket. "Did you sleep warm?" he asked. Her chest tightened, and she swallowed hard before nodding again. "Yes," she whispered, "for the first time in my life." The words hung between them like fragile glass, delicate and full of meaning. He studied her face for a moment, then let out a slow breath. Good, then it was worth everything. She looked up sharply, her eyes wide. "Worth bleeding? Worth nearly dying? For me?" There was disbelief in her voice, mixed with fear that he might suddenly take it all back. But he only gave a small nod, his eyes firm. "Yes, you're alive. That's worth it." Her lips trembled, and she looked away quickly, unable to hold his gaze. No one had ever said such things to her, and the weight of it pressed hard against her heart. She sat up slowly, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. The room was quiet, only the faint crackle of embers breaking the silence. Outside, the snow reflected the new sun, making the cracks of light shine brighter through the cabin walls. She hugged the blanket tightly, whispering, "What happens now? They'll come back. They always come back." Fear trembled in her voice. The thought of being dragged away after finally tasting safety tore at her. He pushed himself up with effort, his wound still stiff, but his eyes sharp and steady. "Then we'll face them together," he said simply. His tone carried no doubt, no hesitation. He spoke as though it was the most natural truth in the world. Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were not from despair. They were from something heavier, something she had never dared to feel before: belonging. She reached out with shaking hands, touching his bandaged arm gently. "I don't deserve this," she whispered. "I don't deserve you." He caught her hand softly, holding it against his arm. "You deserve more than you've ever been given. Don't let them decide your worth." His words sank deep into her, breaking something open inside her chest. She closed her eyes, letting the tears fall freely, not hiding them this time. The cabin filled with quiet again, but it was not the silence of fear anymore. It was a calm silence, heavy with the warmth of something new forming between them. She lay back down beside him, resting her head near his shoulder. Her voice was soft, almost childlike, when she said, "I don't ever want to sleep cold again." He turned his head slightly, his lips curving into a tired smile. "You won't. Not as long as I'm here." His words were not loud, not dramatic, but they wrapped around her like the blanket, solid and sure. Time passed slowly, and the day grew brighter outside. Birds returned to the snowy trees, their faint calls breaking the quiet. The girl drifted in and out of light sleep, each time waking to the steady presence of the man beside her. She had never felt safe enough to rest like this, never trusted enough to close her eyes and know she would wake to the same warmth. Every time she opened her eyes, she whispered to herself, "It's real. It's real." She clung to that truth, afraid it would vanish if she let go. Later, when the sun rose higher, she sat up again, her hands clutching the blanket. She looked at him with determination burning in her eyes for the first time. "I want to stay with you," she said firmly. Her voice shook, but the meaning was clear. "Even if they come back, even if it's dangerous, I don't care. I can't go back to the cold." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded once, strong and sure. "Then stay. From now on, you'll never face the cold alone." Her chest filled with warmth that no fire could match. She leaned closer, her forehead touching his shoulder, her eyes closing as a small, fragile smile formed on her lips. The morning light bathed them both, soft and golden, as though the world itself blessed this fragile bond born in the storm. She whispered one last time, her words steady now, not broken. "I never had a warm bed until you." And with that, she finally believed that warmth was not just a dream, but something real, something she could hold, something she would never let go of again.